Tov's Discernment question number 490. 120 people could not fit in the upper room. Every Pentecost, I hear the same thing from well-meaning pastors, teachers, and preachers. So I have to keep saying this until all these well-meaning preachers and teachers get it right. This error is so common year after year, and it is, frankly, lazy and disturbing to hear it repeated, and it isn't necessary. It's lazy because it is so easy to research the truth about where the disciples gathered in Acts 2. It is lazy to assume and repeat what others keep teaching incorrectly when the truth of the historical context is so easily available. Please let this Jewish man, a first-century Jewish New Testament culture and theology guy, help you G this right. Let's start with the passage. Acts 2 to 1-7 from the New Messianic Version be able. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Yehudim, devout men out of every nation under heaven. Now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together, and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Let me say this again. 120 people could not fit in the upper room. Here is the truth, both 2,000 years ago and today. The term, the house, has always referred to one thing, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, one of the 10 wonders of the ancient world. The disciples of Jesus were in the house of prayer for all nations. We know historically that they met where Jesus also met, in King Solomon's porch, which was one of the temple courts. They were there for the 9 a.m. prayer set, at the time that the eternal light and the rest of the temple menorahs were lit for the new week. And this wasn't just any regular weekly event either. This was one of the 3 days of the Hebrew year when all Jewish men were required to appear at the house of prayer for all nations. Shavuot, known as Pentecost by most Christians today. It was at that moment, at 9 a.m. Friday morning during the relighting ceremony, that the 120 were lit with holy fire from the heavenly altar in full unity with those gathered in Solomon's court. But it was such a massive, loud thing that the sound filled all of the temple, every court. The sound of this miracle from heaven could not be contained. Just as fire came down from heaven when King Solomon dedicated the first temple 1,000 years before, and just like fire came down from heaven on Mount Sinai on the same day 15 years or so before, so also in Acts 2, something like fire came down from heaven upon the new temples, the new houses of the prayer for all nations, the first followers of Yeshua the Messiah, King of Israel, and it empowered them to bring the holy fire of the heavenly temple God to all nations. Let me say this again. They were empowered to make the earth itself a house of prayer for all nations, a process that is still continuing today. Jesus' 120 disciples began by speaking in the languages of all nations gathered at the house after they were filled with those languages visibly as if they were fire out of heaven itself, from the presence of God the Father himself. This was the moment Jesus' prayer in Matthew 14:17 was answered. They became one with the Father as Jesus himself was also one with the Father. This was the moment when they were used, beginning at the former house of prayer for all nations, to answer the most ancient of all prayers of those Jewish people and strangers gathered from all nations. Where is the prophet like Moses? They responded in their own birth languages. At Mount Sinai 15 years before, 3,000 Jewish people died before the fire fell. In Acts 2, 3,000 Jewish people responded with faith and believed in God's plan to change planet Earth into his holy house of prayer for all nations began.